please welcome Tony-nominated actress Anika Larsen, accompanied by Charlie Rauh.
When you're down and troubled and you need some love and care, and nothing, oh, nothing is going right, close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. If the skies above you should turn dark and full of clouds, and that old north wind begins to blow, keep your head together and call my name out loud, and soon you'll hear me knocking at your door. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. Now ain't it good to know that you've got a friend when people can be so cold? They'll hurt you and desert you. They'll take your soul if you let them. Oh, but don't you let them. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, running, yeah, yeah, to see you again. Oh, darling, winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. You got a friend. Ain't it good to know you've got a friend? Thank you, Charlie. Thanks, guys. Should I sing some more? I can sing some more.
Yeah. If we have the rights, yes, absolutely. Well, why don't we get started? And I'll just speak up a little louder because we do also have folks joining us online. So both of you are in the arts, and Anika, and you're a star on Broadway, and Jeff, you are an accomplished documentarian. Can you both share with us and our audience a little bit about your passion and how you became interested in climate change and sustainability issues? So why don't we start with you, Jeff?
Okay. Well, I guess I would probably say that climate change and sustainability found me.
If you speak up a little louder.
Sorry. They found me as questions for films as opposed to me actually going and looking for them. In 2012, the place where I grew up, Long Beach Island, New Jersey, was hit really hard by Hurricane Sandy, and I just I felt like I had to get there. And so my team, we went down and we met people and we started filming what was happening in the wake of Hurricane Sandy and the rebuilding process there. We didn't set out to make a climate change movie, but obviously the questions that arose by being there over the course of the year following Sandy led us to climate change, sustainability, and et cetera. And so I think for me, it's about the people and it's about the situations, and then all of a sudden it can kind of lead back, like the new film, which we'll talk about in a minute, which it is very much in the world of climate change and climate change politics, but I fell in love with the people who are part of it, and I wanted to tell their stories.
Yeah, thank you. Anika, what about you? How, what was the inspiration for your passion?
Yeah, I think like most of us, my whole life, we've been aware of this issue for decades, and so I've been concerned about it my whole life, but didn't really feel fired up to do more than the average person does until about a year ago. I read yet another terrifying article in the New York Times about the dire situation with the climate crisis, and I did what I think most of us do in a given day, which is I seized up with panic, and then I thought, but I recycle, I drive a Prius, I take short showers, I vote for people who would pass green legislation. I simply don't know what else to do. And then I went about my day and it faded into the background. And I think we do that over and over and over again. But this time it didn't feel good. I think it's because I have kids now. And seeing Aisha and how gorgeously articulate she was, how grateful I am for her and people like her on the planet. But I was thinking about my kids and about there's that old saying, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children, and really wanting to do for them, needing to do more. And lucky for me, I have a dear friend who is a professor of sustainability up at SUNY New Paltz. Her name is Andrea Varga, and she is very, very wise and smart about all these things. So I called her and I said, okay, I'm ready to do more, but I don't know what that looks like. And she said, all anybody can do is what they can do locally, where they are. But your local is Broadway, and Broadway gets attention. So I immediately called up Molly Braverman at the Broadway Green Alliance, and I said, what more can I do? I'm in. Put me in, coach. And I've been working with her sort of feverishly ever since then. And then I also, Andrea Varga, my professor of sustainability friend, she teaches all of her courses within the framework of the global goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals. And I said, okay, I've heard you talking about these things. Please explain. And I fell in love with them as much as she did. This sort of elegance of the framework for understanding this big, scary, massive problem for somebody who's mildly OCD like me to put it into categories with targets and goals to make it hashtag the world's to-do list. A to-do list is something we can do, right? It's a problem that is now fixable and manageable. And I thought, well, more people need to know about the global goals. And we are artists. We are storytellers. How can I tell the story of the global goals in a way that makes it entertaining, perhaps? And so I, along with thanks to the Broadway Podcast Network, I created the Broadway Vlog to Save the Planet, which is 17 9-minute episodes where I talk about each of the global goals with a different Broadway figure, and we talk about how Broadway, the theater community, is working to achieve that goal, and then we pull it back out macro and talk about the targets globally and what anybody out there can be doing. So that was my project for Earth Month this year, and if anyone wants to check it out, please do, the Broadway Vlog to Save the Planet. I promise you'll be entertained. You'll have fun.
That's great. Well, thank you. And we'll come back to learning a little bit more about what's happening on Broadway as well. Jeff, you are currently working on a documentary that's called 1.5. Mm-hmm. And the number 1.5 is very important in the fight against climate change. Can you share a little bit more about that documentary, about the number, its relevance, and what you hope to achieve?
Sure. So there have been a lot of documentaries about climate change. I think we've seen some of those films, Inconvenient Truth, the sequel, The Island President, and more. But I think what we wanted to do with this film was something a little bit different. We are following the actual negotiators who go to the COPs and who try and hash out these deals. So we are in rooms that nobody has been in before. We are on the plenary floors. We are there in the small meeting rooms trying to see as 190-some nations come together to form some sort of consensus or not. So we started making this movie. My co-director is a filmmaker named Alexandra Kerry. She is the daughter of Secretary John Kerry, who you saw in one of the videos earlier today. And she had this idea, this work that her dad does around climate is so important and it's so unseen. Could we start there and build a big cast of negotiators and tell the story from COP26 to COP27 through COP28, and give people a little bit of a window into what these processes actually look like. We've now assembled I think we've got 5 or 6, maybe even 7, 8 great characters from all around the world, including some of the island nations that Aisha was talking about earlier today. We closely tracked the loss and damage fight at COP27, and I think we're trying to paint a really global portrait of what this work, this labor of diplomacy actually looks like.
Great. And so when you think about the most important lessons that will come through the documentary, what do you think they would be?
Well, I was actually really struck by something Aisha said about how she's essentially self-taught. Most of the people of her generation are essentially self-taught as they try to penetrate this question of the climate fight at the UN level. And I think the film could provide something of a tool so younger activists can look and say, oh, well, this is actually what is happening in these rooms that we are not often permitted to be in. Here's a way we can target our activism so it can be more powerful, can actually aid the negotiations in some forms, as opposed to a sense that we often had, which is that there was a disconnect between the activism that's happening outside the COPs and what we're actually seeing inside the meeting rooms.
Yeah, I think I'd like to build on that because, Anika, you shared that, your passion came from really talking to a friend and learning that you can do something wherever you are. Let's talk about Broadway and what you're seeing in that sector with your colleagues and in that environment. Can you share a little bit about the work and the level of attention climate change would be getting in that sector, in that space?
I think like with everywhere in the world, it's growing and growing, really. It's becoming so much more present in our lives, and people are getting so much more concerned about it. The Broadway Green Alliance has been around for 15 years doing great work, really super grassroots work. We have green captains, we call them, and they're people who are in each Broadway show in the backstage of each Broadway. It can be cast, crew, orchestra members. And then we also have them in regional theaters and national tours and college campuses. Anybody out there who does theater in any form and wants to be a green captain, go to BroadwayGreen.com. There are toolkits and resources there, so many resources to figure out how to be doing theater more sustainably. But the Green Captains backstage just really help to make sure we're being as green and sustainable as possible backstage in terms of, the usual things. But for us, they become unusual. We recycle the usual things, but also we recycle our instrument strings. They're built to last. You don't want them in landfills. So we do that kind of thing. We upcycle the vases that people send us gorgeous flowers in. Currently, literally right now, a few blocks north from here is one of the 2 e-waste drives a year that the Broadway Green Alliance has, along with textile drives. We do that. We collect e-waste and textiles to make sure that they don't end up in landfills. So there's a lot of work that's being done, sort of grassroots with the people, the members of the community, and then there's the sort of greater, the vast majority of our carbon footprint comes from the HVAC and the electricity. We need our big Broadway lights to do our shows, right? So then how do we do it better? And in my blog episode about clean and affordable energy, I talked to Natasha Katz, who's a Broadway lighting designer, who actually made me feel really optimistic and heartened because she talked about just the sea change in terms of LED lighting and how they use them in all of the lights now on Broadway, in the regular instruments, in the robotic lights, in the lights that are in the sets, and how there's just an incredible amount of energy savings, money savings as well. And this is something that hadn't occurred to me, is that they are cooler. They don't create as much heat, so you also don't need as much air conditioning to recool this space. So there are lots of reasons for optimism, and there's also still much work to be done in terms of Broadway theaters are old. They're gorgeous because they're old. They're the decades and decades of people who performed in these spaces, but they're not necessarily efficient, and we still need to be working on. Eventually, we would like our dream. We're calling it the Theater Climate Revolution, and it's doing everything we can to minimize our carbon footprint, and then to invest in carbon-fighting projects to offset the carbon emissions that we can't help but put out into the world, more than offset. And so we're trying to do that in partnership with an organization called Reverb that is doing this on rock tours. Billie Eilish's tour did this. If you can see on their website the unbelievable amount of stuff that they were doing to be green on her tour, and then the ways that they couldn't be green, they were then offsetting. And I think that that's a lovely model. Offsets are complicated. We should keep having the conversation around that. But we need to be tackling all of these problems from every side.
Yeah, thank you. We're studying a lot more, and in this facility, we're really looking at our carbon footprint and how we can be better stewards of the environment. And I do think that learning more is something that we all can do. I'm just curious about, and I'll ask this question to both of you. Jeff, we can start with you. What's been the most surprising fact or thing that you've learned through your documentary work around climate change?
This specific documentary or just in general?
Well, you can this specific documentary and in general.
Okay. So for this specific film, 1.5, which I should say is being supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, and we are so grateful for that support. I guess I was really surprised by the process that happens at the United Nations COP programs. It is frustrating, it is slow, it is not moving nearly as fast as it possibly could. But I was interviewing a negotiator who works with AOSIS, a guy by the name of Mikai Robertson from Antigua and Barbuda, and I said, Mikai, why do you participate in this? Because it seems like it's constantly frustrating. You are never getting all of the things that you want out of it. And he looked at me and said, I understand that, but what else do we have? Where else can Antigua and Barbuda go and stand up to the United States, the EU, Russia, China, et cetera, and say, these are our needs. These are the things that we need if our nation is going to survive. I never really thought about something like that before, in that sense, this system that creates a mechanism for the very smallest countries in the world to be head and shoulders with the most powerful countries in the world. And that was a hopeful moment, even as we can all acknowledge that the process by which all these negotiations happens is challenging.
And through your work as a whole, would you add to that?
Yeah, I guess I would say that home is really powerful. When I filmed on Long Beach Island, which I don't know if people know it, it's a very thin strip of land off the coast of New Jersey. By all rights, it maybe shouldn't continue to exist in the way that it does. But we talked to people there, and we asked them. We just said, this place could be underwater in 15, 25 years. Why don't you make the move now? Why don't you move inland? Why don't you move upstate? Something like that. And they all said, but this is our home. This is where we grew up, and we're going to do everything we can, everything in our power to stay here for as long as we can. And I find that very moving, and I think there's a connective tissue between what the residents of Long Beach Island are saying and the residents of Antigua and Barbuda and Vanuatu and places like that.
Thank you. What about you, Anika?
I think that the thing that has been most sort of enlightening and edifying, and for me also sort of shifting the ways, something in the way I had never thought about it before, is that in sort of falling in love with the global goals, the three pillars of the goals are people, planet, and prosperity. And it has led me to a definition I didn't come up with, but that I have now latched onto that I think is just gorgeous for sustainability. Sometimes it's referred to as sustainability with a capital S, but it's shared prosperity on a healthy planet. And it holds those three pillars in it. And that is a sustainability I can get passionate about. That's a sustainability other people can get passionate about. We had every Earth Day, if you have nothing to do and you want to come hear people sing Down, come to Times Square. The Broadway Green Alliance does an Earth Day concert there. And I hosted the afternoon session. And the one time, it's just people passing by in Times Square that don't even know what they've happened upon. And the one time we got some sort of response and some hoots and hollers from the audience was when I said that. It's the idea of it is not sustainable if we're ravaging our planet. It's also not sustainable if, as Aisha said so beautifully before, if all people don't have access to food, shelter, education, clean water, sanitation, and equality, no matter who they are, no matter how much money they are, no matter how much money they have, no matter who they love, no matter what they believe. That is not sustainable, and that got people fired up. And that is a beautiful, at the end of the day, what I've come to realize is sustainability is an act of love. And when you think of it that way, that will every day fire you up to act. It's activating in a way that recycling is not so activating and firing up.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Sustainability as an act of love. Thank you. I'll remember that quote because I love the word love. So thank you. Let's just talk about storytelling and why it's important. I actually am an arts patron and worked in the arts. I worked for the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts in Philadelphia. We had 8 resident companies, the Academy of Music, a very old building, Verizon Hall, a very new building. So have had a lot of time in spaces where people are telling stories. I'm curious about, and Anika, we'll stay with you and then we'll come back to you, Jeff. I'm curious about the power of storytelling and the sustainability goals and why they're not as popular here in the United States, why they aren't a part of pop culture. What do you think?
Yeah.
And what
Sure.
can we do?
What can we do? I know, yeah. Well, certainly we storytellers need to be telling stories more in the ways that we are doing. That's the thing that's gotten me excited over my time and sort of falling down this rabbit hole, is how much I'm seeing people out there who are in their lane attacking this problem, the scientists and the storytellers and the innovators and the people who are making good trouble out there. All of the ways that people are problem solving for this, that's what gives me hope. I really do think that there's reason for hope, and I think that framing it in a way that is hopeful, I say at the beginning of each of my vlogs, I want to help you go from feeling helpless and hopeless to helpful and hopeful, which is what the goals did for me. So I think that is a way that storytellers can tell the story in a way that, yes, shines light on it, but makes it hopeful, because that begets action in a way that helplessness does not. I called up my friend Gregory Trico, who, when you all watch the vlogs later, I'm sure it's the first thing you'll do when you go home. I called him up because I wanted him to sing throughout the episode, because it's the Broadway vlog to save the planet, and also sometimes this stuff gets dense when we're talking about it. And when it gets dense, I say, "Sing it, Gregory," and we cut to Gregory, and he sings it. And so I was trying to explain what this is, what the goals are, what any of this means, and bless him, we've been friends for 20 years, and he just trusted me and went with it. But he said, the thing about the sustainability stuff is it's either overwhelming or it's boring. And I said, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And so that's our challenge. And I said, I'm going to try and make it not overwhelming, and you are definitely going to help me make it less boring. And let's go. Let's just do it. And so we did it. And so who knows where it will lead. I never thought I'd end up talking here. But we just got to keep talking. We've got to, at the top of our lungs, at least I have to keep singing and dancing about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Jeff, what about you? The power of storytelling, and I'm curious about the sustainability goals. What your thoughts on their popularity?
Yeah, I think something Anika said is really important. It seems so monumental. Like, how do you wrap your head around this stuff? We're making the last film I worked on, a film called American Factory. We were really interested in this one factory in Ohio that had been purchased by a Chinese company. Through that lens, we tried to take on huge global economic shifts. We didn't talk to experts. We didn't show statistics. We didn't do any kind of fancy graphics. We just met people where they were and told their stories. And that proved to be something that sparked more conversations than I think the movie would have if we'd sat down and said, there is this big economic realignment that's happening, and had people talk in a certain kind of way. And that's the hope for this film, too. It's not about presenting information. It's presenting people. And it's presenting their stories. We want you to meet these people where they are, where they work, learn what they do, fall in love with them, and through the lens of following them, you're opened up into this whole world that has been opaque for so long, which are these climate change negotiations. And it allows us, through their work, to access so many different kinds of ideas. And we think that's the way that you actually create real engagement with major topics. Not by presenting a fact sheet, by presenting actual people in the world doing the work.
Yeah. And what have you learned from your outreach and from the people that you're engaging with?
Well, I've learned that there's a lot of room for optimism, which going into this project, I would say I was not hugely optimistic about the United Nations processes, not hugely optimistic about our possibilities of sort of staving off ultimate climate collapse. But seeing the folks that we've been filming getting on planes, leaving their families, traveling around the world for kind of half a year to go to these negotiations again and again and again, which are so frustrating and so challenging, and they seem so impossible, but still actually winning real concessions like a loss and damage fund, that gives me hope that we can, as a planet, get there.
Yeah. And what about you? I mean, Anika, you are, with your vlogs, what are you learning from your outreach from people?
Yeah, it's it is really that it is. There's so much reason to be heartened that there is that everyone everywhere. I end each of the vlogs with the Arthur Ashe quote: "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can." And just there are so many people out there who are, and that if we all just keep continuing to do that. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Frozen 2, but I have. And the character Anna is at the lowest point in her journey, and she's devastated. She doesn't know how to solve her massive problem. And Kristen and Bobby Lopez, some of Broadway's own, wrote a beautiful song for her called The Next Right Thing, where she just keeps singing over and over again, do the next right thing. And if we all just every day wake up attempting to do the next right thing, whatever that is, often as we scream in the vlog over and over again, often that's vote. It's stay informed. It's consume less in all of the ways that you can consume less: gas, energy, meat, plastics. But what's the next right thing? And then the next right thing beyond that. If we all made that our goal every day, to be doing the next right thing for us, and right also means, it means for others, but it also means for yourself, if it's manageable in your life. Because if it's not manageable, it's not sustainable. You won't keep doing it. It's just do the next right thing. That's a framework I think we can all get behind.
Wow, thank you for that note. It reminds me of a saying that every action matters and no act is too small, and systems are reinforced or dismantled one decision at a time. So do the next right thing, and your voice is probably better.
One of the things we say at the BGA is hashtag it all adds up. It wasn't one big awful thing that got us here. It was millions of little things. And yes, there are powers that be that can make larger, more pronounced change. But all of the little things we do matter every day, all day.
So we're going to open it up for questions from the audience, but I do have two more questions. One is just about, and Jeff, maybe you can share your thoughts on this, audience fatigue. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts? How do we avoid that? Anika talked about creating more hope and, framing conversations where they're not so complicated. What do you think about audience fatigue and how we might be able to push through?
Yeah, well, and I think the idea of audience fatigue is real, especially in the streaming era. There is just so much stuff out there. How do you find your way to a piece of art that is meaningful to you, especially a piece of moving image art? And I think, part of it is incumbent on the artist to push themselves to try to make better art. And I don't mean better art in terms of what I necessarily think is good art, but I think making things that are personal and idiosyncratic, that are focused on people, that are trying to do things that are a little bit different than the audience might have seen before. I think that kind of approach is shown time and again that people can be receptive to it. And then there's the question, once you have created the work, you have to fight for it to get out into the world. When we put American Factory on Netflix, we didn't just stop. We went out, we did screening tours, we created conversations with labor unions and business owners to try and continue the ideas in the film out in the real world, because, putting a movie onto a Netflix or in a theater doesn't mean that it's going to achieve the impacts that you hope to have. You have to continue to work. You think you premiered at a film festival, you're not done. You've got 2 more years of your life ahead of you, going out there and actually sort of supporting the film itself.
Well, okay, so I think I have it. Do the next right thing and fight for it.
Yes.
Some great advice. Mm-hmm. One last question, and Anika, maybe you've shared the power of one, because I do believe that there's so many complicated choices that we all have, that if we can make one choice, or if there was one recommendation that you would have for our audience, what would it be? Jeff? Why don't we start with Jeff? Anika will give you the last word before we turn it over to our audience.
Well, I guess I would say, and this is a quote I love from the British art critic John Berger. He says, consider, this is the beginning of one of his television shows called Ways of Seeing, and he says, consider what I'm arranging, but be skeptical. The idea of skepticism, I think, is really powerful. Cynicism is bad. Cynicism makes people walk away from conversations and actions that we need to take. Skepticism, however, I think is a driver. And if we were all more skeptical of the images, the media that we were receiving, really thinking about it consciously, I think it helps lead to that next action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would say it's you know how they say diets don't work. You have to make a whole lifestyle shift before you're ever really able to get fitter or whatever you're looking to be. And I think that it's, like there's 1,000 things you could say of, turning your appliances off at the plug. And at the end of the day, I think for me, what has really helped, and then it informs all my decisions, is sort of a holistic way of thinking about, and I said it just now, but the idea of consuming less. As we are raised in a society and in a culture that wants to consume more. And if we all just turned that around and thought, but how can I consume less? Inevitably, that sort of leads you in the right direction for the planet, and whatever the thing is that you're consuming less. I was using my plastic scrub brush the other day, and I thought I didn't think through, this was before I bought it a long time ago, but why I would have ever bought a plastic scrub brush when I am sure there is a comparably priced wooden scrub brush out there that I can buy now, because I think now about consuming less plastic. And so it's just sort of become a holistic part of my life and the choices I make. And then, of course, if it's grounded in this idea of sustainability as an act of love, then that's the way that really sort of motivates you to keep doing it, instead of it feels like this homework that you have to do or this burden that you have to bear. If it comes from a place of positivity, then it's much more easy to act on.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's open it up to our audience and see whether or not we have a couple of questions for our guests. We have a few more minutes. Yes, Christine Shoppy.
Hi, Anika, this is for you. You mentioned what you as theater professionals and artists are doing, but thinking about as an audience member, a passionate audience member, and reflecting on the binders of playbills I have in my apartment, and thinking about the thousands of audience members 8 times a week that are receiving the paper. How are y'all thinking about audience and changing the consumer base of Broadway?
Absolutely. Well, very specifically to that question, I do think that the next generation is growing up real used to QR codes, and so there's lots of talk about digital programs. But they are souvenirs for people, and so that's a sort of tougher call, as they really do matter to people. To me, I like to keep the playbills of the shows I'm in. And so I think that, first of all, anytime you go see a Broadway show, you don't need a program for everybody who comes. Consume less. If there are 4 of you, maybe share and have 2 or 1. Also, if you keep it in pristine condition, they will reuse it. If you ruffle it up or throw it under your chair and somebody steps on it, they won't reuse it. But yes, and also I do think that in terms of hazards for the planet, the paper industry has gotten better. That was sort of the 20-year ago problem. But paper is more sort of responsibly produced, and most of the paper that we use now is recycled. So I do think that there are times, again, the next right thing for you is that if we still want these as souvenirs, let's use only the ones we need. But that there are times, I still do a paper Christmas card, but I just yesterday had my stack of spam paper mail that I don't want to get, and I went to the trouble of finding the contact info on the internet and saying, please take me off your paper mailing list, please put me on your emailing list, because that is paper I don't want. And then I'm going to send out my Christmas card on paper, feeling good about that, because I feel like that is a special time to use paper. It's the choices we make. It doesn't have to be a hardship to still have an effect, a positive effect on the world.
Great, thank you. Is there another one? We have time for one last question.
Hi, this is actually for Jeff, and it's really about access. It sounds like in your documentary filmmaking, I Saw American Factory, obviously you got this amazing access. I'm not really sure how. I would love for you to tell us about it.
That's a story.
In the factory, because I think that's so fascinating. I don't know if you can tell a little bit about that story and what the documentary is about, maybe a little bit more. And obviously access to COP, which, like you said, is not really permitted for many of us, even in this room, let alone, obviously, as we talked about, disadvantaged communities, the youth, so many others that want to be a part of that conversation. So I'm just kind of wondering how you gained that access. and what do you think that access really means? I think it's really hard for documentarians sometimes to get that, especially for like sort of young and aspiring storytellers. So
Sure, and we can also over-fetishize access as well, because sometimes it isn't about the access that makes the movie, it is about your perspective on what you do with that kind of material. But I'll say for the cops, it was a lot of just hanging around. And I don't mean that to sound glib, but that is so much of what we do is stand around and loiter in hallways and meet people over coffee and explain what we're trying to do, and then meet them again and explain what we're trying to do again. And then all of a sudden, maybe not the first day, but maybe the sixth day, they say, okay, well, come with me for a second, and we'll let you in. It was hard at COP26, to be honest, because we were new to the scene. People said, what are these cameras around? What are they doing? They're following John Kerry. What is this? Is this a John Kerry movie? There were all these questions swirling, but by the time we got to COP27, everybody knew us because we'd been with them on the road through the entire year. We went to the SBS in Bonn. We went to the pre-COP in Kinshasa. They were the fact that they were almost bored of seeing us allowed better access. By the end, there was actually a very, very tense meeting that we really wanted to be in there. It was about loss and damage. We really wanted to be in that meeting. Many parties were coming. We had to ask each individual party it was okay if we were in there filming. And one of the parties looked at us and just said, well, you've just been here for 2 years. I guess fine. Come on in. And so we'll see what that actually ends up making it into the movie, but some of it is just about sticking it out. And I think part of that was how we made American Factory 2, which, in some ways getting into the factory was not challenging. We had a Chinese billionaire who looked at the film's directors and said, well, you guys are great, come on in. I don't think he knew what we were planning to do, but the maintenance of the access was a years-long daily struggle of going into that place and being nice to people and meeting folks and being there when the chairman came into town and just putting in the FaceTime, putting in the work, knowing when people's birthdays were, knowing what was happening in their lives outside of the factory. That is the situation where, as a documentary filmmaker, people want to participate with you. That's a situation where you're not coming in and being extractive with your camera. You are being invited into people's lives and they want to share with you. And that's the place we like to get to. And it's a very different situation with factory workers in Ohio than with global diplomats, but I think the principles are the same.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are receiving a note that it is just about time, and I'd like to say to Anika Larsen and Jeff Reichert, thank you so much for your leadership, for your love of people and planet, and for amplifying this very important topic. And so thank you. So we have to close. No, we have to stand up. And I am suggesting that we make people outside the doors wonder what the heck's happening in here. So we have to be really, really loud. And thank our guests. Yay! Okay, thank you. So I think we have